I am here to talk to you about just how powerful our perceptions are on our lives. You know, the way we perceive the world, the way we perceive others and ourselves, and even how we perceive concepts that we've been taught directly influence the way we live. You see, we live in this very external world, right? So it's easy to think that life happens out here. But we're beginning to realize that a lot of life is rooted in our own psychology. Our perceptions dictate our reality, and they are powerful enough to destroy or create. Now, before I get into the meat and potatoes of it all, what do I mean by this? So, for example, why is it that we perceive heartbreak as something that's so horrendous? Or why do we perceive having an expensive car as being successful? Well, it goes something like this. So, first we have a situation, and this is what's happening before our eyes. It's real life facts. This situation then travels through what I call our filter, which is what our mind has created based off of our feelings, emotions, what we've been taught, and how we've allowed our past to shape our beliefs and values. This filter then shoots out a perception of the situation, which is our mind's own interpretation of what's going on. So it's very personalized, it's very imagined. And this perception then dictates how we choose to act in response to what's going on. And as we know, our actions affect the entirety of our life. Now, our perceptions are not formed on their own. Over many years, there's this cumulative effect where our brains merge activity patterns from old memories to activity patterns from new experiences to create a more enforced perception on a matter. So it takes a long time and a lot of stimulus to enforce a perception, but once it is enforced, it becomes what I like to call our natural state of mind. And I refer to it as a natural state of mind because it's this way of thinking that just becomes first nature to us. It's like a light bulb, obviously. It just turns on and it does its thing. So once our mind is in this natural state, they still have an incredible influence on the way we act. So it's kind of like driving a car. You know, when you first learn, you're like this poor guy right here. You're like, what am I doing? You have the gas, you have the pedal, the windshield wipers are going when you actually want your blinkers to be going, and then God forbid your mom is bracing the seat next to you. That's what my mom did. But after a while, you don't even think about it anymore. Well, I mean, that's the goal anyway. Hopefully you don't think about it anymore. So when our mind is in this natural state, our thoughts still have a very influential impact on our actions, but we're very unaware of its influence. Our perceptions have such a big impact on who we are, but this is where it gets real personal. They also have an impact on who we are internally. The way we perceive the world, the way we perceive others, and concepts like heartbreak and success that I mentioned, it becomes so engraved in us that it becomes a piece of who we are. Now, it's important to know that perceptions are not a bad thing at all. Perceptions help us figure out what's important to us. They help us become the person that we want to be. But it's interesting because from an evolutionary perspective, we are innately wired to perceive in a way that will protect us so that we can stay alive, right? But I've begun to notice that we don't run from wild animals as much anymore. And so oftentimes, our perceptions don't protect us as much. Oftentimes, they end up limiting us. So we naturally synonymize failure with inferior, or maybe imperfect. What do a lot of us do? We live a life held in the back seat where it's comfortable living to avoid failing. Or how do you feel when you make one of these bad boys at work or school or, let's be honest, anywhere? Not very good, right? Because mistakes are commonly known as a weakness, right? You know, so we live a life maybe not fully trying because of the fear of making a mistake. Or how many of you like feeling like this? My personal favorite, not even a little bit. Fear's a warning sign. You know, your heart rate starts to go a little bit fast, your butterflies in your stomach fly all over the place. If you're like me backstage, you start shaking a little bit. You know, fear is a threat. It's foreign. And so we live a life trying our best to avoid feeling it. And as a result, we might hold back in the way we live because we don't want to confront fear. And like I said, the longer you perceive things in a certain way, it becomes a piece of who you are. To the point where maybe you hold back in the way you work, in the way we grow. in the way we love, which is why it's important to challenge how we see things to create direction for our lives. After all, I did say our perceptions can either destroy or create. So I've been exploring this idea for a little bit now, and so naturally I see it everywhere I go. And even in researchers and icons, one in particular who I'm very fond of, Brené Brown. How many of you have heard her TED Talk, The Power of Vulnerability? She's like, yeah, girl. Check it out, it's a very good talk. And in this talk, she says that her personal and professional life took a complete turn when she realized that the way we naturally see vulnerability has been a little bit wrong. She says that even she hates feeling vulnerable and being vulnerable. I mean, like, who does like being vulnerable? But she realized that after 6 years of intense research, the way to live a life of wholeheartedness, which is a goal I think a lot of us share, is actually through vulnerability, which completely went against her original perception that vulnerability is something that can just stay over there and we don't actually have to feel it. You know, she mentions that vulnerability, yes, is the core of shame, discomfort, and our struggle for worthiness, but it's also the birthplace of joy and creativity and love. And she mentions that even though vulnerability pushed at her, and she tried her very hardest to push back and prove it wrong, embracing it, seeing it in a different light, helped her win her life back. Now, as for me, I am no Brené Brown, unfortunately. I am not an expert or a researcher on this, but the reason why this topic is so near and dear to me is because I lived it. I personally experienced the tremendous impact my perceptions had on my life and my identity. I changed my thoughts, and it changed my life. So if you ask a few people who know me what kind of person I am, they'll probably throw words at you like vivacious or passionate or energetic. You know, I lived my whole life with a desire to inspire people, to leave lasting change on people's lives. But a few years ago, I began to experience a very rude awakening of the world around me. And that melody began to change. I fell into the hardest depression of my life, and I isolated myself from everything and everyone that was once important to me. And this cumulative effect I had mentioned earlier had such a tight hold on me. The more I isolated myself, the more I became someone and believed myself to be someone who was quiet, timid, and afraid. And with every misdirected thought, I was reinforcing these twisted interpretations of myself into my identity. Things that were once first nature to me, like talking to another human, became a raging whirlpool of fear and anxiety. Living like this became my new natural state of mind. But I didn't know it. You know, you don't know your perceptions, you don't know how you see things. I didn't know that I saw the world as a lost cause. You know, I didn't know that I perceived other people to be hurtful and greedy. I didn't know that I perceived things like challenges and fears and stress and worries as a weight that was pushing me further into a hole I was in. I didn't even know that I perceived myself to be sad or incompetent and honestly unfixable. When you're in a place like that, you only know one thing. This is who I am, and that's just how it is. And even as I was emerging from that depression, that perception of myself followed me. That is the power our thoughts have on our lives. They become your identity without you even realizing it. As I was healing, I picked up a book called Your Comfort Zone is Killing You by Billy Anderson. If you're into all this self-growth stuff, this one's for you. It profoundly changed the way how I thought things worked. You know, Billy Anderson, he said that while fear is something that a lot of us don't want to feel, we avoid feeling, it's actually something that's very, very good. Fear, in his eyes, is an opportunity to practice being courageous and to become a better you. So rather than perceiving fear as something that you want to avoid, you should perceive it as opportunity. Now, it's important to know that this was not some sudden life-changing epiphany for me by any means. No. Initially, I thought it was a little bit ridiculous. Like, okay, Billy, let me get right on that, right? Yeah, no. But it did disrupt me, pun intended. It did poke the bear a little bit, and it got me thinking, okay, is it like possible to see things in a different light? Like, could that help me? Even as I was healing from this depression, I stayed living in this dim box. I couldn't see myself to be anything but what I wired myself to be. I realized, I didn't know it now, but I realized when I look back now that what I gave power to had complete power over me. As I was emerging from my depression, I couldn't see myself to be wired anything than what I wired myself to be. But if the mind is powerful enough to enforce perceptions that completely rewired my identity into a state of fear, sadness, and isolation, what's stopping it from being able to do the exact opposite? Rewire your identity into a state of self-love and purpose and passion. It's a completely different way of living when you see the world not as a lost cause, but as a place that needs new solutions. Or I see myself not as unfixable, but as experiencing something that will help me one day help others go through similar struggles. Maybe failure is actually a virtue, an indicator that you're learning. Maybe mistakes is actually an indicator that you're one step closer to figuring out. And maybe fear, as Billy Anderson so cleverly said, opportunity. But it's hard to see things like this in a new light because it's been engraved in us for so long that is just how it is. And what we give power to has power over us. Not one bone in my body thinks that changing or even challenging perceptions is easy. No, I didn't just wake up one morning and think, all right, all my fears equal opportunity, all my mistakes equal learning, get at me, life. It doesn't just work like that. The switch doesn't flip like that. Like I said, it takes years. But I think there's a problem with how a lot of us choose to live. A lot of us don't think to challenge how we see things. We shrug our shoulders and walk through life thinking, that's just how it is. And as a result, we accept maybe a mediocre life as it is, or we accept a hurting world as it is, because that's just how it is, right? But believing that's just how it is so threatening to the growth of not only ourselves, but humanity. Believing that's just how it is giving into a state of mind that keeps us static, being the same way, living the same way, and yet wondering why we feel stuck. So I'll leave you with this. When it comes to how impactful our thoughts are on our actions and our lives, the research is compelling now. I know it, you know it, we all know it, so why do we know so much but apply so little? Maybe it's because we just don't care. Or maybe it's because when we think of challenging something and confronting something as impactful as our own mind, we stop. Because we're afraid of what we'll find. Or maybe changing the way you see something after seeing it a certain way for so long means that we might have to admit that we were wrong. But no matter what it is, challenging these qualities in life allows us to unleash the ability to rewire our instincts. It's not just about thinking positively. No, it's about taking ownership for your life. It's about creating purpose for our life. It's about making direction for our life. Ladies and gentlemen, we've heard it all before. A good life, a great life happens not by chance, but by choice. And today, we get the choice to give our perceptions the power to destroy or create. Thank you.